Welcome back to the Broadman Word, and we are getting back into the plagues in Egypt today. We're going to go to the second plague in Egypt, and that is frogs. Me, as somebody who used to work at PetSmart, frogs are really, really cool. They're not for everybody, but they're really cool animals. Here, though, in this circumstance, probably not so cool. So we'll take a look at that today. And then we'll also take a look at a small difference from the first plague as well. And then, of course, we will take a look at an Egyptian god or goddess that is connected to the plague, because I believe, again, that there is a secret battle between the God of the Bible, the only true God, and the gods and goddesses of ancient Egypt. So we're going to take a look at all of that today. So turn with me to Exodus chapter 8. We're going to be in verses 1 through 15 today. So let's dive right into verse 1. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go into Pharaoh and say to him, 'Thus says the Lord, let my people go, that they may serve me. But if you refuse to let them go, behold, I will plague all your country with frogs. The Nile shall swarm with frogs, that you shall come up into your house, and into your bedroom, and on your bed, and into the houses of your servants and your people, and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. The frogs shall come up on you, and on your people, and on all your servants.' And the Lord said to Moses, 'Say to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools, and make frogs come up on the land of Egypt.' So Aaron stretched out his hand over the waters of Egypt, and the frogs came up and covered the land of Egypt." All right, let's take a pause there. So, second plague is frogs. And there is just a ton of them. When it says a swarm of frogs, you're not just supposed to think of like a specific number. No, it's to the point where you can't keep track of them. That's how many there are. And a couple things really stand out to me about these frogs. First off, when you and I think about frogs in America, sometimes we think about, well, the American bullfrog. And those things are loud as can be. Like, they are seriously loud. Now, every frog, of course, every frog species is different. So not every frog is going to sound like the American bullfrog. But they are going to make a sound in some way, because that's how they call to each other, and specifically how they call to mate. So for me, I think it is really important to see that the sound in Egypt when this happened must have been just deafening. it would have been annoying. It would have been crazy. Frogs don't stay silent at night either. So how much sleep were they actually getting at this time? It must have been a nightmare. But then the other thing is just how randomly they showed up and where they showed up. So, yes, they come from the Nile River. As we see in verse 3, the Nile shall swarm with frogs. Then in verse 5, to Aaron, stretch out your hand with your staff over the rivers, over the canals, and over the pools. So we see where they come from, but then where they get to is not just the water, but they go everywhere. Verse 3 again, that shall come up into your house and into your bedroom and on your bed and into the houses of your servants and your people and into your ovens and your kneading bowls. So the other thing that I think that's interesting about this is just how the first plague would have really affected just everyday life and the economy of Egypt with the Nile River, because of how important the Nile River was to ancient Egypt. Here, it's still from the Nile River, but now it's more of just this like mental, like trying to get the sound of frogs out of your head, finding frogs in just random places in your house where you don't think frogs should be or can be. It's just this just constant. So I think for me, that's why this plague is just really kind of crazy. But you have this, they're just everywhere, all over Egypt, and also where the Israelites live as well. But we'll get to that in the future because at a certain point, the plagues don't happen to the Israelites. But we'll get to that later on. Now, with the frogs plague, I think there's two possibilities when it comes to ancient Egyptian gods or goddesses. I think for me, you could look at Hapy, the god of the Nile that we looked at with the first plague, because the fact that he is a god of the Nile. Now, historically speaking, it could be interesting because he doesn't really show up in records until about the 19th dynasty, which is about 1295 to 1186 BC. So it's hard to say exactly if that's who we're supposed to think about. For me, I think a more interesting connection to an Egyptian god or goddess would actually be a goddess named Heket. And Heket is really, really interesting. Heket is a god of fertility, childbirth, and regeneration. She has a lot of connection to the Nile River. But the big thing that is really interesting about her is that she is a frog-headed goddess. And so the fact that she is actually has a frog head, I think that is absolutely as clear could be connection. But I think what's also interesting is the fertility aspect, and specifically when it comes to childbirth. And what is one of the big things that happens in Egypt in Exodus chapter 1? It is the slaughtering of Israeli babies, and specifically male babies. And so I think that to me is incredibly interesting with the connection to Heket, not just because she has a frog for a head, but because she is the goddess of fertility and childbirth. And so I think that is really interesting, seeing how Egypt murdered so many different Israelite babies in Exodus chapter 1. So I think that is really interesting to keep in mind. Now, as we saw with the first plague and with the staff serpent sign in chapter 7, the magicians or the sorcerers of Egypt actually do repeat this plague. Verse 7. But the magicians did the same by their secret arts and made frogs come up on the land of Egypt. So you might think, okay, so we're going to see that Pharaoh is going to refuse. He's going to just say, no, I'm not going to let your people go. And just like with the first plague. But then there's a change that happens, which is really, really interesting. Don't get me wrong, he still doesn't let them go, because, of course, this is the second of 10 plagues. But what he does is very, very interesting. Let's get to verse 8. Then Pharaoh called Moses and Aaron and said, plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me and from my people, and I will let the people go to sacrifice to the Lord. Verse 9, Moses said to Pharaoh, be pleased to command me when I am to plead for you and for your servants and for your people that the frogs be cut off from you and your houses and be left only in the Nile. And he said, tomorrow. Moses said, be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. The frog shall go away from you, and your houses and your servants and your people, they shall be left only in the Nile. So Moses and Aaron went out from Pharaoh, and Moses cried to the Lord about the frogs, as he had agreed with Pharaoh. And the Lord did according to the word of Moses. The frogs died out in the houses, the courtyards, and the fields, and they gathered them together in heaps, and the land stank. All right, let's pause there. So instead of just saying, nope, I'm not going to let your people go, like he did with the first plague in chapter 7 with the Nile River turning into blood, here with the second plague in frogs, he actually goes, hey, could you take care of this issue? It's almost like he's seeing Moses and Aaron as like pest control, like an ancient pest control. And to me, that's why I think the sound of the frogs must have been absolutely deafening, because Pharaoh is just ready for these things to go. It's not that he says, hey, ask the Lord in verse 8. No, it is plead with the Lord to take away the frogs from me. That word plead is incredibly not, hey, could you just do me a favor? No, it's more like, please get these things away from me because I can't get a lick of sleep right now. I think, to me, that's probably what's going on. And so I think that's really, really interesting. But he sets himself up to fail. He goes, okay, do this and I'll let your people go. And so he's setting the stage for, nope, he's going to go back on his own word, which is then just going to set him up for just this constant reminder that he is not in control. And I think it's interesting that Moses tries to get him to see this as well in verse 10. Be it as you say, so that you may know that there is no one like the Lord our God. He is saying, hey, we'll do this. We'll do exactly what you said, and we'll do it even the time frame that you said when Pharaoh says, do it tomorrow in verse 10. He's giving them all the leeway, and yet everything goes according to plan, except for the fact that the frogs all died and they stank the whole entire land, which is kind of what I was referencing to earlier. Can you imagine the stink of not just live frogs, but dead frogs too? Oh my gosh. So that must have been just terrifying to think about. But then after even all of that, verse 15, but when Pharaoh saw that there was a respite, he hardened his heart and would not listen to them as the Lord had said. So even though it looks like Pharaoh might be turning a corner in verse 8, it is definitely not the case. As seen in verse 15. There's a break, the frogs are dead, the sound is no longer there, I can finally get some shut-eye, even though the place stinks to high heaven. I can finally get some shut-eye, and now that I think about it, you know what? No, I'm not going to let Israel go. So, because of that, of course leads to the plagues just keep going on, and Pharaoh just not listening to God. So we are going to continue on with the plagues on Thursday. But thanks for spending a little bit of time with me today as we took a look at the second plague of frogs and started to see maybe a bit of a chink in Pharaoh's armor, but not the case. But I will see you Thursday. Thanks.